One last ride. The Guardians of the Galaxy return in Volume 3, once again directed by James Gunn, in what represents the ending of this trilogy. Still reeling from the loss of Gamora, Peter Quill rallies his team together to defend the universe and one of their own, a mission that could mean the end of the Guardians, if not successful. I have not been genuinely excited for a Marvel movie in quite some time, but that said, the Guardians remain some of my favorite characters in this entire universe, and James Gunn is a filmmaker that will always have my attention, someone who in my opinion has continued time and time again to prove himself, so I was still hopeful that this movie would be good. With any massive blockbuster that's coupled with great expectations, it's easy to automatically be overly hyperbolic when discussing it, and while I'm going to try to not be too dramatic, there is just so much to love about this movie. If you don't include the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special, this is the first time the team has been on their own since 2017 with the release of Volume 2. And I think James Gunn really exceeded at picking back up with these characters almost like they never left, like we never had time away from them. The chemistry is off the charts, the narrative is stronger than ever, and this core group feels like they've been through a lot of stuff, but because of that, they're closer than they've ever been. The film also promised to expand on Rocket's origin, letting us know where he came from and the horrors that led him to where he is now. But on top of that, it not only had to exceed at being a continuation to the story, but also bookending this trilogy. This is the end of the Guardians of the Galaxy. We are not going to see them, at least in this capacity, possibly ever again. And I must say, with all of the things that this film had to accomplish, while not perfect, it worked incredibly well. This is a James Gunn movie through and through, and I think it represents the best elements that he brings behind the camera. It is fun, it is wacky, it is very, very vibrant and grand in scale, but the thing that impresses me the most is that with all of these grand ideas, with all of these fun and over-the-top elements, the thing that always shines through the most is the heart. And that's an element that this film is absolutely packed with from beginning to end. It is extremely emotional, and it gives every single character enough time to shine on their own and gives them enough room to expand on their growth a bit, while also always hearkening back to the idea of this family, this idea of teamwork, and this relationship that they've built over the course of these past 3 movies. The biggest standout for me being Rocket. He is the one that above all has been marketed the most for this film. The way they explore his backstory, the dark elements that they go into, the nature of it all is very, very touchy. It's very disturbing at times. It can get unsettling, but the story accomplished what it was going for very well. About these people from all different backgrounds, all different viewpoints, all different perspectives in life coming together to find a family in circumstances where they were sort of pushed aside by their own. They felt lost. They didn't have a place in the world until they found each other. And it's that idea of a found family, how even though you're not of the same bloodline, even though you're not from the same background, the love that these characters have for each other is more important than any of that. It doesn't matter about where you've come from, it's about where you're going and who you have surrounding you. The way that Rocket's story is told through backstory, through flashbacks, is heartbreaking at times. The emotional moments really hit. There were multiple times to where I was actually tearing up because, yes, I am staring at a CGI raccoon, but the writing is so top tier that it makes you buy into every single element, regardless of how weird and fantastical it is. And while Rocket is the main focus, I think something can be said about every character. Throughout the entire runtime, you are fearing for every single one of their lives. You don't know the direction it's headed, and you're questioning who's still going to be around by the end of it. But each character throughout has plenty of growth. Their relationships all get stronger, and by the end, I was very, very satisfied with how everything was concluded. It really plays with the heartstrings, giving you plenty of moments of laughter, of sadness, of excitement, of fear. And I appreciate the fact that no matter the subject, James Gunn always finds a way to highlight the humanity in any situation, in any character, And the heart is what ultimately stuck with me the most. It feels like it's going back to that formula that I love. It feels like it's going back to the things that make up this universe that I grew accustomed to in the first place, that I became attached to over time, that in the past couple of years, the MCU has sort of strayed away from. I have not felt the same connection to an MCU movie or project in quite a long time, but this felt like a return to form for me. There was a cohesive narrative through line that felt very in line with these characters. It felt like the stakes were big, but it didn't need to include all of these over-the-top elements to connect it with the rest of the universe. It stood on its own very, very well, and I think that's another thing that James Gunn does very well, is with every movie he's directed in this universe, he's had those elements that he's included that make it feel like a part of a grander thing, but at the end of the day, he is telling the story he wants to tell. This is his style, this is his vision, and it doesn't feel like you're watching something that's heavily altered by a higher power. It also contains some of the best visual effects we've gotten since Avengers Endgame. The amount of CGI is heavy here, and that paired with these incredible action sequences and big set pieces really worked. I saw this on an IMAX screen, and I think it really just elevated the entire experience. This is definitely one that I would recommend seeing on the biggest screen possible. It's also, in my opinion, by far the funniest movie in the entire MCU. It has a great way of balancing all of these elements from the very beginning, both the character development to the humor to the emotional moments. It all works together very well, and nothing feels like it's overstepping, nothing feels like it's forced. It all feels natural, it flows very well, and it really worked for me. There's a couple gags that carry on throughout the entire movie. There's also a few one-liners from characters that will stick with me for a while. I was very impressed with just how much of it landed with me. This has probably the best villain we've gotten in the universe since Thanos. You really buy into his motivations. He is so over the top to an extent that feels scary, that feels unhinged, like you don't know what move he's going to make next. Especially when you tie that into the origin of Rocket, everything works very well and makes him come off as a legitimate threat. Marvel has always had a villain problem, but when they're good, they are really good. But the film's not perfect, and as much as I loved it, I did have some issues with it. The film is 2.5 hours long, and I think for the most part that flows very well. You don't feel the runtime for the majority of it, but there's a part in the middle, in the second act, that tends to drag just a bit, and it felt like there was an overwhelming amount of things going on all at once that while watching the movie, I was getting physically exhausted. Not because anything was bad, not because I didn't understand what was going on, but it was so much of excess that it was sensory overload to a point to where I needed a minute to breathe, and it didn't really provide that. There are a few times to where it goes off on these little tangents that don't necessarily focus on the main plot thread of the entire movie. It's just little gags here and there, little side quests that, while enjoyable, doesn't need to be in there to make this movie work. And so when all of that was thrown in at once, it was a bit overwhelming. It's not bad, it's just something that I think could have been handled just a bit better to really continue the pace steadily, because I feel like we were off to a great start and the film ended great. But in the middle, it just sort of slowed down a bit. We were also introduced to Will Poulter as Adam Warlock in this movie, and I was very curious to see what they were going to do with his character. He wasn't heavily in the marketing, and I thought maybe that was due to him having a bigger role that they didn't want to spoil. But after seeing the film, I will say that while the moments we got with him were not bad, were somewhat enjoyable, I was a bit underwhelmed. He felt more of like an afterthought, and if there's anything throughout this entire movie that I would say was mandated by the studio, it would be his inclusion in the film. And I think a lot of the times, his character comes off more unserious than anything. It comes off more as a joke. And when he's in the movie, there are moments that are exciting, that are fun. But as a first entry, as a first introduction into the universe, I feel like it could have been just a bit better. Nothing goes against Will Poulter's performance. I don't think he did anything bad here. it just felt like they could have, if they're going to include him in this context, could have done a bit more with him. There are also a few things with the ending that I won't get into because I don't want to go into spoiler territory that didn't upset me, but I think could have possibly done a bit different, and I'm a bit indifferent on how I feel about the conclusion as a whole. For the most part, I think it wrapped up quite nicely, and I think it bookended the trilogy well, while also highlighting the themes that this entire franchise has represented from the very beginning about family, about passion, and the way trauma can bring together these unlikely relationships. Just some of the characters' decisions towards the end, where they end up going, felt a bit off to me in the grand scheme of things. I have a feeling I'm going to be in the minority with that, but that's just something I wanted to throw out there. But overall, I massively enjoyed myself with this movie. It was far better than I hoped it could be, and I know I had criticisms there, but that doesn't take away from the fact that I think that this film is very special, that I really enjoyed it. It's not perfect, but flaws and all, it worked very well to me. It really hit me and impacted me in a way that I did not expect. It represents everything I love about the MCU and is ultimately set on providing an entertaining and satisfying experience for fans. And I think it seamlessly bookends the trilogy in a way that is going to work for a lot of people, in a way that cements this as possibly the best trilogy in the entire MCU. So with all that being said, I'm gonna have to give Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 an 8.5 out of 10.
Awesome. Yes!
But guys, make sure to comment down below. Let me know your excitement level for this movie, and once you see it, tell me what you think. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to leave a like on the video, and until next time, I'll see y'all later. Peace out.